everybody, and welcome to Pierre Calame's seminar on taking responsibility seriously. Our guest today, who comes in a series of prestigious seminar holders like Guido Calabresi, Elena Berg-Sackman, Gunther Frankenberg. Our guest today, Pierre Calame, was for more than 20 years the CEO of the Mali Foundation for Human Progress, and now he is the president of that foundation. He's been an entrepreneur in his own right as well. But more than talking about his deeds, I'd love you to point out that this is one of those guys, and we treasure them, that wants to invent a future for us which is different from what the dominant thought, the dominant thinking in economics will make us have if we don't challenge it. He calls for a deep systemic change, a change that will bring us new goals, new institutions, new actors, new concepts. Today we will talk about two of those concepts. This morning we'll talk about responsibility, and this afternoon about economy with an initial OE. Let's start from this first concept, economy. What Calame points out to us is that talking about sustainable economy, talking about green economy is an oxymoron, and a very dangerous oxymoron of the present dominant thinking. There is no way to reform the notion of economy with an initial E, and we have to rethink it in another way, which is not about a world where resources are infinite. So he calls for oikonomia in the etymological sense, the Greek sense of managing a house with scarce resources. But I won't expand, I will not expand on this, and I will let him articulate his thought this afternoon. Another oxymoron of our present day is the corporate social responsibility field. Professor Calame tells us that, and he knows it by experience. He was at some point the CEO of a large industrial bloc. Professor Calame tells us that responsibility is something more than accountability. It is something more than being held responsible to people who have the same interests you have or who share some enterprise with you. You can't be responsible just being a good guy as a CEO of a large industrial group, because 90% of your attention will anyway be given professionally to your shareholders, and 10% will be for the rest, and the rest is that, basically. So, on these two oxymorons of our present day, Professor Calame will share a discussion with us. Our friend tells us that we can interrupt him in his presentation. He will make a 1-hour presentation, but he welcomes interruptions, thoughts, questions while he talks.
Thank you. Well, thank you for welcoming me. You tell me if I don't speak loud enough. Also, English is not my mother language, as you understand. So sometimes it's a bit poor, and I will not find the proper word that be indulgent. What I would like to share with you this morning is how a small foundation like ours became conscious that responsibility would be at the core of the 21st century ethics, how do we came to the conclusion that we had to build a new vision and regulation of responsibility at the world level, and how it came that we have undertaken a cooperation with such a prestigious institution as Collège de France, which is the highest academic institution in France, to build a common program about the evolution of the international legal order related to responsibility. I'm not a professor. I might call myself an intellectual activist. And for me, the two terms are not contradictory, they are complementary. From the beginning of my professional life, I was confronted to the fact that in many fields, realities that I was seeing was contradictory with what had been learned, what had been taught reality should be. So what do? When you're an academic, you have to pay attention to your masters and to your peer review and say, if it is the academic way to think, it should prevail on reality. As an intellectual activist, I say, reality prevails on conventional thinking. So if I see contradictions between what I see and what I was taught, maybe it is what I've been taught which is wrong. And then I have to elaborate the thinking out of the reality. So this is my intellectual posture, and that's why, as a practitioner, because before being in the enterprise at one moment, I spent 20 years of my life as a senior civil servant in France. So my main background was a practitioner of governance at different levels. How does the society is managed? How do we face the contradiction? How do we build regulation? How can we have emergence of a common vision of the future through the contradiction between material interests and so on and so forth? That has been my main background. Now, when I came to lead an independent foundation, it was as far away as the beginning of the 80s. My first question was, what is the usefulness of the foundation? It seems a stupid question, isn't it? Because many foundations will have a very ready-made answer. Well, we are about philanthropy, and there are so many things to do, good things to be done. Let's just choose one and get devoted to this. But we saw things differently. We say, finally, what is the specificity of the foundation compared to the other institutional work, whether it be NGO, enterprises, or public authorities? There are two assets of the foundation. First of all, it can act long-term. We are not dependent on shareholder values. We are not dependent on elections. So our life should not be structured by short-term vision or assessment of impact. And there are very, very few institutions which have the privilege to be long-term oriented. And you're confronted to that in our present society, where everybody understands that there are major long-term challenges to be addressed, although all the big institutions are short-term oriented, looking for the next market or looking for the next election. So the contradiction we are facing now between the nature of the challenges and the nature of the institutions which are supposed to tackle these challenges is a little danger, little risk for humanity. Right? So long term is a privilege, and we have to do something good with long term. And the second is independence. When you refer to independence, most of the time you will say, oh yes, but academic autonomy or freedom of research. Is that real independence, actually? When you look the way academics are anxious about the peer review and publish or perish, when you see how they are entrenched in academic discipline, and if you go beyond the discipline, they are not good enough, not enough specialized, so they divert in transdisciplinary approach. But finally, the sanction will come from the discipline. Right? And if you look at the scientific research, I'm sorry to say that the independence is extremely relative. Because now we're at technoscience. We need big physical means for research. And so you are totally dependent on who gives the means and how to keep your research funds going on. And this doesn't depend from your vision of the common good. It depends from completely different logics, right? So, long-term thinking and independence has become incredible privileges in our present reality. So what to do with those privileges? First of all, not lose it. I mean, most of the foundation destroy their own freedom. Because freedom is a risk. Freedom is a danger. We spend all our time destroying our own freedom, right? We pretend we enjoy our freedom, but in fact we just are looking to linkage and bonds which will limit it. Because freedom is also an anxiety, right? It's not just joy. It creates, the uncertainty of what should be done. The other problem of our institutions right now about independence is that they are bound to a certain field of activity. Let us just look at a state, at the politics. They are entrenched in the internal affairs. A minister is entrenched in his own department domain. And there are very, very few ways to address transversal issues. So you can see that we are facing global challenges. Everybody knows it. Yeah, look at the talks about climate change, the talk about the loss of diversity, the talk about increasing disparity between poor and the rich inside each country. Everybody knows there are huge interrelated challenges. But now if you ask yourself, where are those issues of common good? addressed? The answer is nowhere. Just nowhere. So we say we have to use our independence, accepting not to assess our impact, which is quite difficult in a world which is totally dominated by managing references. All our elites now are formatted in management. That is shorter measurement of assessment of impact. Can we assess our impact of a small foundation on the major challenges of the world? Can we imagine that? Of course not. So if you remain in the conventional wisdom about efficiency, about indicators, metrics, about assessment of impact, you condemn yourself not to be useful. So we are in a world where efficiency and usefulness have become contradictory. Do you know that? Efficiency and usefulness have become contradictory. So, how to address major challenges? First of all, accept not to measure your impact, and then try and work together to understand what are the major challenges of our work. We started to do that with the think tank 30 years ago, and very quickly we understood, first of all, the different, what I call, economic globalization and real globalization. Economic globalization is absolutely reversible. Think at the Soviet Union and the Comecon, integrated economy. For political reasons, they decided to break it, and they survived. There has been a first wave of liberalization and economic globalization during the 50 years before the First World War. And it was stopped by the First World War. So economic globalization, which is presented just like a fate, is a choice, a political choice, a social choice, right? It's absolutely reversible. If Europe would decide to create its own autonomous economy, it would, of course, depend heavily on fossil energy and natural resources from Africa, from South America, and so forth. But it might happen one day that we withdraw from WTO. So economic globalization is reversible, right? And it happened in the history many times. So there is nothing new about economic globalization. It was the case at the Roman Empire. It was the case before the First World War. It was the case for the Soviet Union. And it disappeared at one moment. But what about the real globalization? Globalization of interdependencies. These have become irreversible. I don't know whether you are familiar with the concept of Anthropocene. You heard this word? Anthropocene. You will find it in the reading now, certainly. What we describe as Anthropocene is a new geological situation of the planet, which started at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And it's a situation where the activity of humanity has a complete impact on the equilibrium of the planet, of the planetary field itself. And it is described now, like the previous geological orders, as mechanisms, with the opening of the cycles of the carbon and nitrogen and so on and so forth, which create a completely new state of humanity, which didn't start at the first Earth Summit of 1992, which was, I would say, the political moment of the description of the impact. But it has been described since the 18th century. So for very long now, humanity and wise people, thinking people, had understood that we had entered in a completely new area in the story of humanity. And so, because now our impact, cognitive impact, on the destiny of the planet and humanity is so huge, now we have entered a situation of irreversible globalization. For the best and for the worst. Now, how to think about that? How to manage that is a major challenge of our time. I would say the only challenge which should deserve our own energy. All the rest is secondary. Because what we are doing is irreversible for our children and grandchildren. And everybody knows that. And it has been written and written and written again and again from one conference to another conference. And what is done about that? Nearly nothing. Hardly anything. So, when we try to vision the fact that we were entering in a huge transition, we tried to understand how to face it, how to conceive and how to drive the transition. Conceive and drive. Both are difficult, including conceiving it. As it was mentioned, over the last 20 years, we have only produced oxymorons. Sustainable development is an oxymoron. It has been conceived as an oxymoron, politically. At a moment when the first Earth Summit was prepared, and the first, you remember, the first public launch of sustainable development was the Brundtland report on our common future, relating back to 1986. But how was the concept built? We can trade that. It's very simple. On one side, there was the need to protect the planet and to curb our way of life and our development model. On the other side, there was a call, legitimate call, of many countries for their right for development. So politically, we had to keep the word development. And we had to describe that, but it would be different. So we put sustainable development. But in fact, the very logic of the development didn't change at all. It's just lip service to curbing it. And yet, you look at the figures, for example, the consumption of fossil energy or green gas emission or whatever, all the international meeting didn't change the way it happens. Neither biodiversity, nor the desertification, nor the evolution of the fishing stock. Whatever you look at, if you would try to look at curves and try to guess when did these big international conferences take place, you couldn't put it on the curve. Just as the Millennium Development Goals. You look at the curve about evolution of poverty, and you try to guess when did the international community decided about Millennium Development Goals. You won't find it, the point. And for a very simple reason. Politically, what has been done? Most of the reduction of absolute poverty would come from one only country, which was China. 60% of the reduction of the global poverty in the world come from the development of China. So they chose the moment to start the metrics of the Millennium Development Goals in order to improve the development of China in the figures. You know? This is the real stage of the international community right now. This is the real stage. Lip service. So can we expect that a major scientific or technical breakthrough or political revolution would provoke the systemic change which is called for? The answer is no. There is no such thing as the great evening, you know, of everything is changed. No. 30 years ago, with our group, we concluded it will be a systemic change. But now, how to undertake a systemic change? And there, we were facing another contradiction, or the same contradiction that gave birth to sustainable development. Maybe you heard about the great French sociologist, whose name is Edgar Morin, who has been one theoretian of the complexity. And Edgar Morin would say, okay, nice talk about the planet has become a village. And of course, the young Chinese people, the young Burundi people, the young Pakistani people, the young American, the American people listen to the same music, use the same YouTube, share the same social networks, and so on and so forth. So, in terms of flow of information, in terms of organization of global supply chains, what some theologians call the flat world. If you look at the clothes factories, the supply chains mobilize subcontractors, whether they would be in Romania or in Burma or in Vietnam or in Tunisia, just like we were operating in a village, and they just decide through internet, give me the prices, etc. And when you look at what is a cloth business, you can see that the buttons will come from Asia and comment tu dis, le tissage, the weaving, the weaving from North Africa, whatever. Okay. On that respect of information flows, images, and economic linkage, we have become a village. But Edgar Morin says, a village without love, without justice, without solidarity, without the feeling of the common good, and without responsibility. So it's a village of outlaws. So we understand that we need to build an international order. We need to have a very strong global governance. All right. But then the most of the poor countries would say, well, we are not in favor of a global order under the US imperium. Right now, all the institutional institutions, whereas this has been the UN at the beginning, the WTO, World Bank, IMF, and so on and so forth, have been under the control of the rich countries. So we don't feel that the present management of the global governance is legitimate, neither it be democratic nor efficient. So, under the three criteria of legitimacy, democracy, and efficiency, there is no such thing as global governance. So, we have to face two major challenges. First of all, the systemic nature of the change to occur, which should articulate many fields of our activity and articulate altogether our personal behavior with international legal order. And we have to address this issue of the need of the management of global interdependencies altogether with the lack of legitimacy of the present institutions. Am I right? So, the first thing is to build a new way to dialogue among societies. And here has come the issue of values. Can we imagine to run a unique planet, which means a lot of sacrifices on our personal freedom, without agreeing on some core values? Can we imagine to manage a global common good without a common understanding of ethics? The answer is no. This is the way we got in the issue of responsibility. Now, what are the universal values? And what is their impact on the legal systems? If you ask that to a jurist, or in the street, or to an NGO, what will be the answer? Just tell me the answer. What are the universal values right now? Human rights. The only universal reference to value is human rights. Now, my other question is, are human rights really universal value? The answer is no. I don't mean that they are not universally enforced. I mean a much deeper issue. Are they universal by themselves? And the answer is no. The interesting thing is, first of all, that human right has no translation in many languages. These languages have had to create new words to fit with this so-called universal value. Why? Because in many societies, it is community which is important. Because it's a condition of survival. And the individual is subordinated to collectivity. So, of course, over the last decade, a lot of dictators have used this fact to justify that they would not respect human rights. But unfortunately, in the depth of the culture, they are right. It is not a universal value at the beginning. It can become a universal value, which is completely different. And when you address the way, it was claimed as universal value. When was it? When was the Universal Declaration of Human Rights?
1948.
1948. Where did it come from? Who was the
An American lady.
Huh?
An American lady.
Léla Roosevelt and a French jurist, René Cassin.
I'd love to have a link that I'd love you to make a link
Yeah.
with another concept which is not universal, which is the rule of law,
Right.
which doesn't have a translation in many languages.
You're right. You're right. You're right. You're right. So, what is called the only universal value? When I ask you what is universal value, you answer human rights. As you look at the anthropological reality and the way it was adopted, it was not universal. It was the pressure at the moment when the Western world was hegemonic at the level of the world. And as a Western, I think it's a good thing that we put it on the agenda. And we can see that over the years and the decades, it has created more and more legal binding laws in order to enforce these rights. And I would say, thanks to this Universal Declaration, the world has maybe become a little more human. But saying that doesn't mean that it was really universal. Now, the question I would like to ask you is two questions. First of all, are human rights enough to manage our interdependencies? And second, if it is not enough, is it possible for the Western world now to impose its own values as universal? What would you answer to these two questions? We cannot run interdependency just with rights. That's clear. Now, can the Western world impose its own values on the rest of the world? The answer is no. That's too late. Maybe it's a minute, but that's too late. The global world has become highly multipolar. And so, if we have to agree on common values to manage our unique and fragile planet, we have to find new strategies to discover universal values and to adopt this as the basis of the management of the global economy. You follow me? It's okay? Okay. So, we launched in 1993 a rather unique process that only an independent foundation probably launched, which we call the Alliance for a United and Responsible World. So now we have to learn to listen to each other, not in the terms of international conferences, where there are the speakers and the followers, the big mouth and the big ears. The big mouth has small ears and the big ears have no voice. Right? That's the reality of the international conferences, right? Probably you practice that. To a true way to try and understand each other. And it was a fascinating process because we learned to find partners, allies all over the world in completely different cultures. And what did we try to do with this alliance? Two things. First of all, try and agree on what were the common challenges. Because what you say is globalized, it's irreversible, there are challenges. You have still to describe what are the challenges, right? Because you cannot expect to have a strong strategy for addressing challenges if you don't even know what they are. And we are very, very far at the international community from having a strategy. What is a strategy? If you look at a company, or if you look at a region, or if you look at a city, or if you look at a state, is a strategy about listing hundreds of problems? Is it useful to list hundreds of problems to build a strategy? Tell me. No. What do you have to do to build a strategy?
To build a plan to solve them.
To know what your goals are.
Huh?
To know what your goals and your challenges are.
Sorry, I'm a bit deaf.
No, my voice is gone. If you want to make any strategy, you're asking if you want to make any strategy.
Yeah, what it is, building a strategy. How do you build a strategy?
You need to know what's your short goals and your goals for the long term and the short term, and how to achieve them, the challenges that you are facing. You need to identify your challenges.
That's right. So building a strategy is moving from listing problems to say these are the core challenges, 3 or 4 or 5, certainly not 10 or 12, to be addressed. If I take the example of a comparative strategy, I would mention the people treaties. People treaties, you heard about people treaties. It's a way for NGO in front of the governments to say, we have our own agenda, we have our own proposals. How do we build consensus with NGOs? Just by adding the agenda. There is a feminist NGO, the ecological NGO, the social NGO, the pro-animal NGO, and whatever, and they put all their agenda together and say, this is what we agreed upon.
Oh, how very true. I mean, the United Nations have identified 170
That's right.
global world days of something.
Yeah, exactly. They spend all their time listing problems. And believe me, it is the opposite of a strategy. A strategy is about, okay, there are a lot of problems. And if we want to be even more comprehensive, we will pass to 1,000. But the issue is, what is at the core? What are the 4 or 5 major challenges? How to address it? And so this is the collective global effort we did. And the other effort we did was precisely to open the discussion about what kind of value can be considered universal. And so we had an intercultural, interreligious group running for several years. And we came out with a good news. First of all, there is universal value. And second, they are fit to the management of interdependencies. And in a way, the conclusion could be shown as obvious. You can tell me, why to need such a large intercultural, interreligious dialogue just to come to an evidence? But we needed to do that, to make sure. And so, one value came out as a core of the 21st century ethics, and it was responsibility. Now, first of all, why responsibility is universal? Why can it be found in any culture? And second, how does it fit with our future challenges? First, why is it universal? What is a community? How do you pass from a mass of people to a community? what is at the core of the building of any organized society? It is a feeling of reciprocity. A community exists at the moment when you are accountable for your impact on the other members of the community. And it's so true that inside most legal orders, you are not accountable on whatever impact you have outside the community. The definition of the scope of responsibility and the definition of the community is exactly the same. A community exists because there is this feeling of reciprocity. The long-term learning that if you don't practice reciprocity, then you destroy the community. And any community has to develop its own construction of regulations which will enforce reciprocity. That doesn't need necessarily written laws. It can be just a feeling, just as you have of your feeling of responsibility toward your children, or toward your parents, or toward your kids, you know, even if it's written in the civil law. It is not because of the existence of the civil code that you feel responsible for your children, or for your parents, or for a brother. No? It's because you belong to the same family. And the same way for most communities, which have only oral regulations, oral laws, I would say, but the question of responsibility is at the core. Now, so, and we had published some books about an international dialogue about responsibility, and one can see that the precise definition, the precise wording of responsibility is very different from one culture from another, including because the relative roles of the community and the individuals vary from one society to another. However, we really hold a universal value. But this universal value has no equivalent right now as the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. Now, why responsibility is fit to our present challenges? The German philosopher Hans Jonas has said for very long that the change on the size of the impact would change the very definition of responsibility. So what we did is not to discover a new concept as we would discover a new planet, you know. But just to make sure that it was universal. But what is responsibility? Responsibility is about your impact. Therefore, it has first to do with freedom. If there is no freedom, there is no responsibility. There only are duties. What you are compelled to do, and once you have done it, that's all. Is that enough? I will take you a very present debate about international finance. What is at stake in the present negotiation, Basel III and all what has followed the financial crisis? It is about banking regulation, right? The strengthening of the banking control and things which are forbidden. So we are on the legal side of the process. So we have created, I would say, new duties for the banks. Now I ask you, are those regulations enough not to face new financial crisis? No. Why? Because of the difference between duties and responsibility. Because any regulation is not suppressing moral hazard. Presently, banking institution leaders can behave in a very irresponsible way at the condition and the regulation. But when you look at in depth, just like Finance Watch has done in Europe, Finance Watch is a network that was created to organize a citizen lobby towards the European Union in front of a huge lobby of the banking institution. We spend 300 million euros a year in Brussels to lobby the Commission and the Parliament to explain them how important it is to keep the freedom of the big banking system, to give them room to act because our prosperity is so dependent on financial institutions. And we can say that regulation imposes new duties, but regulation doesn't suppress irresponsibility, doesn't suppress moral hazard. So, first of all, responsibility has to do with freedom. And this is very important to understand how to enforce responsibility. I will come back to that later. Second, responsibility has to do with power. If you have no power, you have no impact. If you consider, which is a very major historical problem for the servicemen, that your only duty is to obey to the order of your hierarchy, you are just irresponsible. Remember all the trials about the Nazis. They said that I was a good soldier. I had to obey to my chiefs. I pledged that I should obey to my chiefs. And all the historical discussion about responsibility has emerged from the discussion on power, on hierarchy of loyalties. Are you mainly loyal to your boss? Therefore, you are responsible. He is responsible. Or are you loyal to humanity? And therefore accountable for your acts? Whatever have been the orders. If I've been ordered to torture, what should I do? Risk my life in refusing? Or saying, well, I'm totally irresponsible. Nobody was responsible for Auschwitz. Except, at the top, Hitler, maybe. But all the rest was irresponsible. They had to obey orders. They were good soldiers. They would be good civil servants. They would be good patriots. So, responsibility with power. The power to decide. And the impact of your decision. Because you poor guy in the street and you behave in a bad way, the impact on the rest of the planet is very limited. But you are a big scientist, you are a Nobel Prize, and you develop new technologies about brains, about biologic manipulation. And you say, I have no power, I'm looking for truth, because scientific research is about searching truth. uncovering the mysteries of the reality. But I can't help it. It has been badly used. My brain researchers have been used by dictators for manipulation, and my biological discoveries have been used by Monsanto to impose GMO on all the world. I can't help it. No, you can't. You have had an impact. And your impact has been huge. Then your responsibility is huge. Right? So first responsibility related to freedom, and second is related to power. And in a situation where there are big powers in our world, whether they be scientific or political or economical, this issue of relationship between responsibility and power is extremely important. And last but not least, responsibility has to do with interdependence. And there we come back to the irreversible globalization. Let us think of the impact of the fishing stocks, the state of the sea, climate change, biodiversity. Who is accountable? Who is accountable? It's a result of millions of acts. No one with bad intentions, with many people who personally have their own ethics, care for their own children, even care for their neighbors sometimes. But, well, unfortunately, the impact on humanity is little. So, responsibility has to do with interdependence. So, what is the consequence of that? It is that we have to create new common references and regulation about responsibility.
And I just struggling a little bit with the idea of, I don't understand very well your point, universality of responsibility. In the sense that I see what you mean when you say that every human society, you want me to speak up a little bit? Okay. I'm struggling about the idea of universality of responsibility in the sense that I just see how responsibility is at the core of every human society, in the sense that once you enter a society, the very fact of being a society means people to feel responsible for the breach of the main values within the society. But my question would be, once you, responsibility, I feel it more like a feeling or a set of rules of accountability for a person which breaks some values shared within a society. And I don't really get how this can be considered as the value shared by the world and as the universal, while maybe just a mechanism that different society naturally put in place when one of their value is break. So in this sense, it wouldn't really be universal unless we say that we share the same, the same assumption of values in order to enter responsibility. I don't know if I was clear.
Well, as far as I understand your point, a very important question. To have universal responsibility, you need to build the conscience of global community.
Yes.
And second, you need to link with international legal order, international binding obligation, regulation. So, universal responsibility has a direct link with building a global community. And here, whether we address this issue or we address the issue of global regulation, we are confronted to the obstacle of the Westphalian state. Of the idea that the ultimate representation of common good is a state. It is a national level. So, what we, and I will explain you how we're trying to do it concretely. Discovering common values is ineffective if at the same moment you don't try to build a global community. But we can turn it upside down and say there will be global community at the condition that we bring common values. So we have to walk on these two feet. And here I come back to the obstacle of the Westphalian state. Probably you are conscious that since the eve of the 21st century, no one intergovernmental negotiation has succeeded. They all failed. Whether it be on commerce, with the Doha round, or of course about climate change, with the inability to go beyond Kyoto Protocol, which has not been agreed upon by many countries. So what's happening? Here I have to make a lateral comment. What is the main obstacle we are facing at the world level right now? I will share with you my decade reflection on conclusion. When you say the society is evolving, you probably have in mind what is evolving quickly. Transportation system, information and communication technologies, economic and financial integration, evolution of culture, some fashions, etc. So when we say very often, even just really thinking about it, our world is moving very fast. And of course it is. I mean, I've been many times in China over the last 20 years. Every time I go to China, I discover a new China. It has transformed itself so dramatically, you know. So the world is changing fast. And everybody is talking about the world changing fast. Is it real? Is everything changing fast in our world? Tell me. Yes? No?
No,
No.
because I think that's
What is changing slowly?
feelings of people, like relationships,
Yeah.
emotion.
For example, what is changing slowly in a world? There are two things which are changing very slowly.
Power.
Power balance is not changing very quickly. I mean, do you imagine the power of Facebook or Google 20 years ago? If you look at who is a billionaire, Now, and who was billionaire 50 years from now, you will say, no, power has changed dramatically. No. But what about the conceptual system, the mind framework, and what about big institutions? They have not changed. What is your university you have been trained in? Who created it? It is very modern. Von Humboldt. Berlin University, when was it? 1812.
1812,
2 centuries from now. You have been trained, not the same faculty, of course, not the same discipline exactly, but the very conception of university is 2 centuries old. What is the framework of the international negotiation? Intergovernmental. What are the states? What are the nations? How do they negotiate? What is the difference between the Vienna treaty negotiation after the fall of Napoleon and the negotiation about climate change? Very little. Of course, at that time the ambassador had some freedom because we needed 3 weeks to go and go back from Paris to Vienna, and now we just to make a call. But at the core, the conception of the state, of the sovereignty, has not changed over 250 years. 250 years. What we call Westphalian state. You learn that. What is a Westphalian state? Why Westphalian? You heard this word, I suppose. You know the concept. Where does it come from?
It's coming from the Westphalian Treaty in the 16th century. Actually, it was at that time the European countries they emerged against the church, and they created an order in which they do not interfere with each other, and this order created the modern states actually.
And it was in 1648, in which intellectual and institutional framework was built independence in Africa on the concept of Westphalian state. It's 3 centuries from now. Completely different set of challenges to be addressed.
Yes, I'd love to then introduce a new word in this, which is knowledge. I mean, to measure the impact of your actions, you should define the territory of your actions, and you should know it. One thing that is always related to a community is the knowledge of its territory. Is
The
that
knowledge of
its territory? The territory?
yeah.
Le territoire.
Yeah.
Is that something that we have as an international community or as a global community now? Because you see, what you are pointing at is Western glasses, Westphalian glasses, to understand and even to build and organize realities which are very far geographically and in time from Westphalia, okay, from 1648. Okay, so what we need is a knowledge which is not through Western lenses, through Westphalian lenses, to understand the real impact of our actions. We can't have responsibility if we use the old conceptual systems. That is what you are telling us at the moment.
I'm sorry to say it's no more an issue of knowledge. Everybody knows the global impact. Everybody knows. Everybody knows that any major multinational company, including Fiat from Turin, can move from one country to another to organize a global supply chain and choose the best way to limit its fiscality. Everybody knows from the TV, from whatever, the impact of climate change, on natural catastrophes. I mean, it's no more a question of knowledge. It's not a question. We all know about the global impact, but and we can describe it, and we can describe it also about health, about the new possible epidemia. I mean, and the problem that we are facing for the ordinary citizen is that they know everything and feel totally powerless in front of these issues. So there's a deep feeling of the gap between impact and the inertia of the institutional order. So that's what I was describing, the two things with an enormous inertia is the way to think and the institutional framework, with a huge lag between the reality of the challenges and the way we address them through our mental lenses and through our institutions.
Actually, I do think that there is a big problem of knowledge, because what you're saying is basically that we are kind of stuck in a situation where everything is changing fast, but the assumption of all the world, which are institutions and yeah, I would say culture or the basic assumptions of the conceptual framework. And the knowledge is, the problem of knowledge I see is that those two, institutions and conceptual theoretical framework, are seen as universals. And nobody knows that they're not, or people don't know, or they are mostly presented and shown to society as universals. And in that sense, of course, people don't start talking about problems and they list problems that cannot be solved, because of course the only solution would be to overcome those basic assumptions, which are those institutions and theoretical frameworks. So this could be a problem. Yeah, a solution could be also through knowledge somehow. And then I have a question, which is, but when you say there are common values and common responsibility, therefore they need to be built, in your opinion. They're not there already. I mean, do you think there are universals which are theoretically universals, or do you think those universals need to be built?
Sure. They are culturally universal in the sense that they can be found in every community, in every society. But, of course, they are not yet universal in the sense of being accountable to my own impact on the rest of the world. That has to be built. I will come back to the process of building. But I wanted first to help you understand what were the major inertia. But really, I challenge the idea that there would be a lack of knowledge. The negative for foundation is the possibility to dialogue with the rest of the world. I've been probably in my life over more 100 countries. We have partnered with more than 100 countries. So I think I have some practice of the word, including farmer organizations or slums organizations, or whatever, not just big shots and grading professors or whatever. The feeling of the global impact and some knowledge about this impact is really shared everywhere. You can deny it, but you don't ignore it. You don't ignore it. The impact of global commerce on any village of Africa is enormous. Enormous. There is no such thing like small entrenched societies which would have no relation with the rest of the world and would ignore the integration. Deny that there are any problem of knowledge. There is a problem of ability to address issues. But what you have pointed is very rightly is how to pass from the intellectual understanding of, yes, value is shared, some value is shared by every community, to the idea of universal responsibility. That's exactly the issue at stake. So, but one must understand the ideas here of the institution and of the intellectual framework. Yeah, I will take another example about democracy. What is representative democracy? When did it emerge? And in which technical and intellectual conditions? The present representative democratic regimes we are under in most countries, when did it emerge? Recently?
No.
No. Probably somewhere between the 16th and the 18th century and the generalization at the 18th and 19th century. What is it? What is representative democracy about? It's a situation when society has become too large to have an agora, to have citizens meeting on the same place and discussing the common good. It is a situation where transportation is slow. So to go to the capital is it takes a long trip. And so you need to send representatives. It is organized at the national level, because it was at the time of the enforcement of the Westphalian state. And it was at a time when a lot of people were not able to read and write, were illiterate, and they had to send lawyers. Most of the deputies in the French Revolution were lawyers, in fact. People were used to write and discuss law and so on. This has been the concrete historical situation for the creation of the representative democracy. Is that a world democracy at the time of internet? That's very unclear. What you have to keep in mind is it has been invented at the moment and with a technical system which doesn't exist in. That's the only thing we know. I don't mean it has to be changed. I don't know how to change it. I just want to show you how strong is the inertia of our systems. And I will come back to that point about the legal system, which is nearly exclusively entrenched in the national borders. So we have to link together building the feeling of a global community and universal value of responsibility. And we need to act on the inertia of the conceptual framework and institutions. So we always worked on these two legs, and that's why, I mean, if you look at the effort we're making right now for pushing forward the idea of responsibility, the role of people in different continents, working with the civil society, working with the institutions on how the concept of responsibility could be at the core of the society and become an international reference, is absolutely key to make sure that we are not just working at a central level to promote in intellectual terms universal responsibility. Now, how to progress about responsibility.
we have found there were three main levels. On the left. The individual level, the socio-professional level, and the legal level. Responsibility, as I mentioned, was about freedom, so it's about ethics, about choices, and not only about duties. So we need to address the evolution of every citizen about his conscious of responsibility. One of the things which deserve attention, which we are proud of, is the effort to put this issue in the cursus of the children. The educational curses are, of course, very different from one country to another. However, if I look at my own country, there is more and more intellectual learning and less behavior learning, if I may say, ethical learning. So an environment, because many children are very sensitive to what's happening to the environment, becomes a quite interesting topic to address the issue of responsibility. And there the Brazilians have been the leaders of the process. And at the beginning of the 2000, in link with all our reflection and effort to promote responsibility, there has been the first national conference of youth in Brazil, which has been called Let Us Take Care of Brazil. Let us take care. Feeling of responsibility. You could say teaching responsibility to children is a trick. Because finally you say responsibility has a direct link with power, and you start with the responsibility of powerless people. And in fact, all the training about responsibility shows that children need to tackle with the issues of their size. If you say to children you are responsible for climate change, you put in their shoulders an unbearable burden. If you tell them, which is a reality, your parents have behaved irresponsibly, you will inherit a threatened planet, and this responsibility will be yours, and you are 15 years old. How to hold that burden? But the experience shows that once children are confronted to issues of their side about waste, for example, waste at the school kitchen, waste of water, waste of energy, thinking together how to fill that, then they become very active. They can go beyond their own feeling of powerlessness. And so the process in Brazil has proved very successful. Then in 2010, we had organized the first international meeting of youth from more than 50 countries. The schools which were involved in the process sent their own delegates. You will find that on the website, it's very impressive. Children from all the world discussing about their responsibility. Let us take care of the planet. They adopted a charter, and there is the European Charter of Children Responsibility.
And they went and presented it to Herman Van Rompuy, who is the president of the European Council. And Herman Van Rompuy, I was there, Herman Van Rompuy nearly burst into tears, you know, because to see those young people would say, we will take our responsibility. We're ready. And he knows perfectly well, because he's chairing the Council, the European Council, how irresponsibly the political leaders of Europe are behaving, you know. He nearly burst into tears. So, if we don't work, and you know, and you cannot imagine what it means, children from two countries, 15 years old, discovering they are sharing the same hopes, the same questions, the same culture, the same love for dancing, for singing, you know. And this can be a very modest story. But it's an illustration of the need to build a global community. Because what is humanity? Humanity until World War II was a philosophical concept, right? Or a religious one. We're brothers, okay? From our religious belief. Or intellectually, yes, there is one humanity. But it was just a philosophical concept. Although there were so many links, between the different societies. Then what happened after World War II? It became a juridical concept. Humanity exists because there is a crime against humanity. If there is a crime against humanity, then humanity exists as a legal subject. But it is not still a social reality. And I come back to the states. Sovereignty of states have become a major obstacle to the building of the global community. I don't know whether you are familiar with the international negotiation. I have been involved directly in the last one in the Rio Plus 20 international conference, which was supposed 20 years after the first summit, to say now we move to action. The most optimistic observers of this conference say it's quite a success. We didn't move too much backward. True, believe me, that is we didn't move too much backward. Because there was the financial crisis and the economic crisis, and our world leaders have entered in complete schizophrenia. Remember 2009, October, as far as I remember, the G20. What did they discuss, these world leaders at the G20? How to face recession, how to relaunch the growth through consumption. And China was told to develop internal consumption because it was a condition not for the world to get in a global recession. That was in October. And then they just came back to the capital, maybe solve some day-to-day problem. Then where did they go? They go to Copenhagen. Negotiation on climate change. And what they would say? Stop the consumption. Danger of China as becoming the main polluter, main producer of greenhouse gas emissions through the growth of the middle class. The same people, and they have not been put in an asylum. Any schizophrenic should be put in an asylum. We agree on that. It's a danger. But they're still in charge. That's the reality. That's the reality of the world. Totally irresponsible behavior. And now, when you look in detail how intergovernmental negotiation is going on, it's built on the idea of national interests. Now, I ask you, are national interests existing by essence? Nothing in the nature as national interests. Why national interests exist and not interests of the rich and interests of the poor, or interests of the farmers and interests of the consumers, or interests of the enterprises and interests of the worker, or whatever? This is not the way international negotiations are structured. They are structured. Confrontation of national interests. But national interests exist only because state exists. So we start identifying our national interests, what we present our national good, common good, and then we confront it. It has absolutely no chance to succeed. Absolutely no chance to succeed. It's exactly the opposite of the building of a global community. And if you look, what came out from the Earth Summit about responsibility is common but differentiated responsibilities. Right? We read that. We read the conclusion of the Earth Summit. Common but differentiated responsibilities. This has been repeated in every international conference about climate or bright environment since. What is the exact meaning of common but differentiated responsibility? Do nothing. Total irresponsibility. The rich countries would say, what's the use to move towards transition towards a sustainable society if China and if India is not making the move? No use. And China and India and Brazil would say, well, you have polluted the planet for over 1 century. You are in a huge ecological debt. We need finance for green technology. You have to pay for that in the context of public finance crisis. And so, start to do it, and we will follow. And each one say, start to do it, and we will follow. So, national states, intergovernmental negotiation, and common but differentiated responsibilities. Instead of building a global community, is making the building of global communities nearly impossible.
What is, in your opinion, the role of the corporate actors in this framework?
Corporate actors. The word responsibility is widely shared by the corporate actors. They are speaking very much about responsibility. But responsibility means accountable on what, to whom, and which is the third party which will determine the degree of responsibility, the importance of the damage, and will be able to impose sanctions. Accountable to whom? Shareholders. Shareholders. A lot of people in the corporate world are good people. I do not share the idea of the NGO that they are good people, they are facing an entrepreneur world who would only think about profit and power. Inside the corporate world, you find real crooks and irresponsible people who would kill their mother and father just to get more power and more influence and more money. also you find a lot of schizophrenic people who are really facing the contradiction between children and grandchildren. I would like to make them a good living. Altogether, if I want to keep my place, I have to deliver a shareholder value. So, at that moment, once again, there are rules which create duties for the corporate world. A lot of norms. But there are many national, very few international norms. So you have a lot of strategies to escape, even in terms of public image, to responsibility. Sometimes there is a campaign, like it happened with Nike or with Nestle, from NGOs, saying that you are responsible for your impact. You are responsible for your subcontractors, even if subcontractors have no juridical links with the company. Remember the story of Erika. You know Erika. Erika drove the breaking of a petroleum ship on the coast of Britain. Destroying the coast. The petroleum was controlled by our national firm Total, big petroleum company. But the ship was not his. It's property. It was independent. Even probably the very property of petroleum at that very moment was maybe in the hand of traders on the international market. And so, when Total got to trial, he said, I have no responsibility. I asked the ship owner to respect the international regulations. I'm not the controller of the ship. If the controllers fail, if the ship owner has behaved irresponsibly, maybe because of the negotiation of the tariffs, because there was a competition, you know, Total said I'm irresponsible. And at the end of the trial, he said, okay, I'm ready to pay some 100 millions to Brittany because I'm a good guy, but not because I'm responsible. That's the situation right now. It's the same with Bangladesh, you know, the problem. So, first of all, I would not say that the entrepreneur world is by itself irresponsible or whatever. They are not necessarily good guys or bad guys. There are good guys and bad guys, the same as in the other fields of activity, including NGO. So I'm not seeing the world as the good people and the evil, you know. Second, responsibility has come on the front floor, front of the scene, as public relations. If you look carefully at the spending of the company, the cost of the public document about the enforcement of its responsibility is probably higher than the expenses it had on its own to behave responsibly. And you can see that the public relation issue is major. Third, there is still a tendency, but very different. I mean, really, you can see that there is a margin of entrepreneurs who really are trying, although the contradiction with shareholder values, to make responsibility more than lip service. But there is another fringe which really is completely cynical. You know? Most of them have created an ethical department. That's nearly mandatory now. Create an ethical department, including for communication reasons. But remember internal discussions, just like the sustainable development department. Look, do your ethical job, I do business. So there's another kind of schizophrenia coming in, you know. So although we are able to address the issue of collective norms, I will come back to that, and legal regulation, the contradiction between the juridical nature of the company, which is only accountable to the shareholders and only bounded to respect legal obligations which are based at the national level, which have been easily escaped by moving from one country to another, it will be extremely difficult to pass from lip service to real responsibility. Even more, some 10 years ago, at the moment of neoliberal delirium, which has gone now after the financial crisis, I must say. But if you go back 15 years from now, there was a real neoliberal delirium. You could see a bunch of big company leaders writing, now we are representing the common good, because we are the only actors at the size of the common, which is real. The big companies are right now the only actors with some international NGO at the level of the government. But to mask the reality of the shareholder value, of the very logic of the company, and explain that you are in charge of the common good, is really too much either of unconsciousness or hypocrisy. That's that kind of state. So we have to create common bridge. I was just describing the first level of responsibility, which was the individual level, showing how we need, for example, acting to push forward on the agenda of the networks of local authorities, the idea of a new co-responsibility of cities, education system, and children about a learning of co-responsibility. And I'm confident that there will be a move. So the second level, which was evoked about the corporate world, is the social profession. This is very important. Because even more than money, people are looking for esteem, including esteem from their peers. And the building of common references is a very important step to enforce responsibility. I will take an example which might sound strange for you, which is Army, the servicemen. There is an international network which is called the International Society for Military Ethics, which is working concretely on case studies about how do you behave responsibly towards society when you are a serviceman. There's a very strong move towards what is the responsibility behavior. You can see the same with shareholders, perhaps shareholder networks saying, okay, we are looking for value for our investment, but all together we are looking for the ethics of the company we are investing in. Of course, there is a fashion about the ethical firms, which are unfortunately very often lip service. But there is strong move about, I want to be ethical but with my money. There is also a very strong collective move about ethical consumption. saying, if I want to be citizen, it's not by voting, it's also the way I consume, including the food, for example. What is the impact of my decision of consumption on a Malaysian farmer, or a Malian farmer, or a Chinese worker, or whatever? So there's an evolution. There is an evolution, but which is slow, about academics. Because as responsibility has to do with the building of the community, the enforcement of responsibility has to do with the social contract. So we have an international network of scientists, and another international network of academics, about what is the new social contract between science and society, between higher education and society. And once again, you cannot say freedom of research or freedom of teaching as the paramount of responsibility. You have to think what is your responsibility toward the global society. There is also the same process about journalists. What is responsibility? What is the responsibility of journalists? We say media is the fourth power. Okay, if there is power, there is responsibility. What is the responsibility of journalists? What is the responsibility of the professional in the companies? Here again, they can say that I have only loyalty to my boss. But no, there is an international network. All that I will give you references if you want to look at, on what is the responsibility of the professional. At what moment has he or she to say no to his boss? Because here comes the contradiction between the loyalty to the hierarchy and the loyalty to humanity. So there is a strong international move. Of course, I would expect it to be quicker, but you see that the second way to build a universal perception of responsibility is to start from the different social professional networks, because there you be very concrete. For example, one issue for the scientists is the whistleblowers issue. Are you familiar with whistleblowing? Yeah. No? No. What is a whistleblower? Is somebody in a position in an institution, whether it be scientific institution or corporation or financial institutions, who sees that something is going wrong with its institution behavior. And there comes the contradiction between the two loyalties, towards humanity and towards the hierarchy, towards the institution. So the whistleblower is a guy who says, my loyalty to humanity is more important, and I unveil the behavior of my institution publicly. So you can see the link between the effort of a social professional network to think about its responsibility and a call for deregulation, which includes, for example, the discussion in France recently from our network's proposal of a law of protection of whistleblower. Because I remember 20 years from now, in Korea, when some professionals from companies unveiled the impact of their company on the environment, they were put in jail. They were put in jail at the time. Not only fired from the company, put in jail for prison. So you see the link between building a collective conscience of what should be the reference of a behavior in the social professional world and the building of national or international regulation. Yeah?
The thing that I want to say is that responsibility thing is in modern society too much tied with the legal meaning of the responsibility in the first place. Because when we think about responsibility, we usually mostly think about the criminal responsibility at the first place. So I think that how can another institution, without imposing criminal sanctions, can be possible to be created in order to flourish responsibly? This seems a little bit hard for me, because our limits of thought are usually confined to this punishment. If we don't do something, we are punished. And I don't think humanity is not improving more towards some
morally.
yeah, maybe not moral. It is the issue of social contract in the first place. Actually, that's what I believe in.
Well,
It is the fundamentally we have all now out of our obligations to the smaller communities right now. We don't have obligations to our families or to our society. It was something before something else, but right now we are like more. We don't have any responsibility, and we want to not have this responsibility to the smaller society, because we want to live in cities or in we want to be more free. But what you are proposing is that even if we don't have this responsibility in our smaller society, you still say that we can create a type of responsibility for the bigger arena, for the universal arena.
yeah, well, okay. My answer is, first of all, is it an option? The answer is not. If we want to have a future, we have to do it.
Yes.
There's no other option, first of all. Second, the difference between, once again, compliance to legal obligations and accountability. Let me take a recent example. The English Commission on Banking. The president of the commission said the major problem of banking system, financial system right now, is not regulations, it's moral hazard. It's irresponsible behavior. So we have to be able to put in jail CEO of a banking institution which behavior has created damaging impacts. Impacts, not compliant law. All the civil law is about measuring the damage, identifying the cause of the damage, and deciding of compensation, right? It's not only about legality, it's about the real impact of your behavior. And so this is what we have to build at the global level. What happened with the financial crisis? You remember the American expression, too big to fail. That is so important, so influenced that there is a risk that you let it disappear. But the real issue was too big to jail. If they would have been put in jail, not Madoff had not complied with obligation. Madoff was in illegality. But Barclays, or the Royal Bank of Scotland, or of course Lehman Brothers, complied with all their legal obligations. But they put the world in a global crisis. So you have to address the issue of who caused the damage to whom, and what kind of compensation, and which is the court which has the third party which has to appreciate the importance of the damage, which has to appreciate the link between both, and which has to impose compensation. This is what does not exist at a global level. And this is the third part, because we are nearly finished, sorry. I had so many things to share with you. I only shared a little part. But this is why we are working with top-level international jurists now to say how to internationalize the legal system about responsibility. And here comes a very major difference. I don't know whether a lot of you are lawyers, aren't you? No. Okay. You heard about Mireille Delmas-Marty? The name you heard? It's probably the highest French jurist about international law. And she makes a very important difference. I learned a lot from her, I must confess, between international law and internationalization of the law. Because just as there is some kind of independence between legislative, executive, and judicial powers, there is a transformative process going on in the world now of mutual influence of national laws, which is also a way to produce a global legal system. And this is what we are facing now, and we are trying to organize an international meeting of jurists next year. Why next year? Because at the end of the year, there is a COP21, the negotiation of the climate. And we said we can discuss whatever we want at length between the governments. If it is not the opportunity to push forward the idea of international responsibility, we will go nowhere. Why? Because a very simple question. Bangladesh is going to be flooded over the century, right? We are going to destroy an entire country. Who is accountable? To whom? Who is going to compensate? Who is going to take in charge the climate refugees? Who is even to decide for the size of the damage and who is responsible for that and how to compensate? There is absolutely neither laws nor courts to come to responsibility. So this is why we have to have this, I would say, systemic approach of building a global community. For example, that's why I created the China-Europa Forum, to say we cannot be confident in the dialogue between our political leaders to come to a common good. Because there are so huge resentments, so huge misunderstanding between our people, you know. The impact of Europe on China has been so huge at the 19th century. And a lot of resentment, there's a feeling of revenge. And then we have to deal with that. And this is not solved by the visit of the president of China in France or in Europe. We have to build processes, social processes, through which the societies discuss together of the common good. Discuss together. Learn each other. Try to understand the other's position. And your group is certainly an outstanding group to try and do that. Try to understand each other. Because once you've said, oh, there is a global common good, there's a long way to do to travel to a global community. So that's the first point. Second point, individual consciousness of responsibility and train our future generations to be responsible, to understand that it's a core value. Third, building at the level of each professional background and put together the ideas of professional responsibility and the way to behave and the way to... And last but not least, act on the legal system by two combined ways. First, internationalization of responsibility legal laws by litigation of the different national legal system, by cross-fertilization, by pushing forward new ideas. So I mentioned, for example, the sphere of influence in terms of the responsibility of the corporation. And last but not least, come to build an international declaration on human responsibility, which would be endorsed by the UN, which would be the equivalent of the
a universal declaration of human rights, because you have to walk on these 2 feet, complementary feet of rights and responsibility, because there are two feet on the same body, in order to elaborate a really international legal system of responsibility. This is what the global process we are facing, and it might seem, abstract to say, to talk about legal system, to go around the inertia of the institution, but it is at the core of the contradiction we are facing today when we want to address our common challenge to manage the global conflict. So, thank you. So we are talking different subjects this afternoon. With
So,
the same group, let's go.
This afternoon at 4, the campus in Audi will discuss the second oxymoron of our day, which is economy with an initial OE instead of economy and green economy, sustainable economy, whatever these oxymorons have not taught us as yet, but you will teach us.
Okay. Okay,
So
thank you.
we'll
for
see
listening.
you at 4 this afternoon.
Thank you.